Hey there, podcast listeners. This is Justin from Beyond the Uniform. My goal is to give active duty military personnel the tools they need to have a successful transition to a civilian career. This week, I'm speaking with Tim Avery. It's a longer interview than normal, but just really, really great stuff in here. So Tim has a lot of experience in the management consulting industry. So for anyone interested in that, he does a really good job of explaining the industry, the key players, what life is like, advice on those seeking a career in management consulting. He is also currently doing his Doctorate of Psychology and Clinical Psychology at Stanford. He does a lot of work with veterans and the veteran community. So I think this is also really great for anyone considering pursuing advanced education. One trend that has come through in these interviews from almost everyone is the importance of self-knowledge, the importance of realizing what you want and what you want to do. And more so than in other conversations, I think Tim does a great job of breaking down in a tactical way, using books and different advice, ways to get to know what you want to do and just really being self-aware in a way that will help your career and personal life. Tim references a couple different things: recruiters, consulting firms, books. There are links to that in the show notes at beyondtheuniform.io. Also, our interview jumps around quite a bit, but I've tried to lay out at beyondtheuniform.io the different time markers. So if there's a specific aspect of this interview that you're interested in, I list the different time points so you can fast forward to that and be a little bit more efficient if you'd like. So without further ado, here is Tim Avery on management consulting, self-knowledge, PhD process, and more. Well, Tim, really appreciate your joining me on the East Coast today.
Glad to join you. Thanks for having me.
I wanted to go through, just before we start, some of your personal background, but I guess Tim and I have known each other since the Naval Academy, back from the men's glee club, so a long time now, and reconnected when Tim came out to California over at Stanford. But backing up, Tim was at the Naval Academy, class of 2003. He got his Bachelor of Science in English Literature and Engineering Core curriculum with a Japanese minor. All in, he served about 12 years and got out as a lieutenant commander, if I'm not mistaken. And initially went into management consulting with both BearingPoint and then later Booz Allen Hamilton. And then started in 2012 to shift over to pursuing his Doctorate of Psychology and Clinical Psychology as part of the Stanford PsyD Consortium. And while there, he's done a lot of work with the Department of Veterans Affairs, first as a research assistant and psychotherapist and yoga instructor, but also with McGuire Veterans Hospital and the VA Northern California healthcare system. And, in addition to just thinking Tim's a great guy and wanting to get a chance to talk with him, I was particularly interested in speaking with him about consulting, about the PhD process, but also he's got a lot of experience with veterans and through his work with his clinical psychology work. So was curious to dive into that as well. So Tim, I guess just starting off, I thought we could start with when you made that decision to leave the military, how you approached that decision.
All right. Well, I love what you're doing. I think it's fantastic. It's really valuable. I could tell already. I actually got out of the military twice. My career is kind of odd. At first time, when I first transitioned to management consulting, Navy and Air Force were drawing down while Marine Corps and Army were growing, 2003, 2004, for the wars. And I wasn't in line for a warfare qualification, so I made that list of people getting out separated early. So a year after commissioning, I got let go. And the reserves were told that they couldn't accept people either. So Navy was full, no more billets. So that choice was made for me at the time. And that's when I went to management consulting. But the second time, was a much more structured approach, and I think we'll get into this more later. But I was enjoying the Navy. I was doing reserves in a very, very active reserve unit, taking orders as much as I wanted because there's plenty of activities to support. And I was doing management consulting, going back and forth. And while both of those were interesting and as good as it gets for office type work, it wasn't quite hitting the spot. So I had to do some self-exploration, and that led to the second time that I requested to go with individual ready reserve IRR and started the grad school process.
Okay, great. One thing I guess before we move on to consulting, since you talked about the reserves, is I think it's always helpful for people to hear about how the industry responds to the reserves. And I'm wondering, either in general for management consulting or specifically for BearingPoint and Booz Allen, how supportive of they were they of your time in the reserves and giving you that time away? How did that work with them?
Well, it just so happens that my time at BearingPoint, I wasn't drilling at all in the reserves, so I didn't have to be concerned about it there. But the person in charge of my practice within BearingPoint was a Naval Academy grad, and he loved the idea that there's another grad on the team. He was a Marine, and so I get the sense that they would have been totally fine with it. Of course, they have to be fine with it by law. They have to keep the positions available and promote you. If your whole peer group gets promoted while you're gone, then you should be promoted as well. If it's merit-based and they have clear reason to promote other people while you're gone, but not you, if that's clearly supportable, then they don't have to promote you, but they have to keep your position for you while you're gone. And Booz Allen actually was very supportive. I did it a few times. I kept going back and forth, longer and shorter orders. And Booz Allen's first federal client was the Navy in 1941. So it's part of their heritage to support veterans and reservists. So it wasn't a challenge at all, even though I hear horror stories about some companies legally doing the minimum that they have to do. But I felt no friction. And in fact, they supplemented base pay for 6 months out of 12 every year that I was on orders.
Wow.
So they do some calculation to figure out if you were working for us, what would be your hourly rate, how many hours are you not here, and they pay you 6 plus 12 months. So I lived, it was nice to have that financial support as well.
That's great. That was one of the things I was going to ask, because my assumption would be they just kind of stop your pay and consider it unpaid vacation, but the fact that they supplemented your income is really great.
Yeah, especially for the enlisted folks, but anybody in most cases, going back on orders are going to lose money, and they don't want that to be a detriment or to degrade or stress out their employees who can't meet their bills while they're gone.
And moving on to consulting, I'm just putting myself in your shoes of this unexpected transition, probably many years before you would plan to leave the military. And on top of that, all of your peers from the Naval Academy, they're not yet going through this transition. So I'm wondering at that point, how did you start to research what you wanted to do, and how did you end up deciding you wanted to go into management consulting?
Well, it really was a challenge, and that's why I know what you're doing is important, because there's nobody in my peer group to talk to. And in fact, a generation or two of graduates ahead of me, depending on how long you consider a generation, there weren't many people to talk to there either. So there are some recruiting firms that focus specifically on military or include military that are not specifically military. So Lucas Group, was it Carmen? There's a few different names out there.
Yeah.
And so they're happy depending on your level of experience. At that point, some of the people wouldn't take me because they want warfare qualified officers, and they place them in certain management positions normally in operations at larger companies. So some of those services I couldn't use because I was too junior of an officer. but other ones will gladly help me. And talking to family. I have some older uncles who are in different industries, and the web. So between those three things, that's mostly I collected, went online, and for some reason I ended up. I think one of my uncles actually recommended management consulting because I described what I like about being an officer, and that's being a management consultant. Almost every line of skills applies in some ways to management consulting, and it's as we commonly say, a jack of all trades, master of none. Understanding what other people are capable of and what skills they bring to the table, and bringing those resources together to meet some sort of goal. That's often what being an officer is, or senior NCO. So management consulting in some ways was a way of deferring deciding what I want to do when I grow up. A lot of consultants I met who had been in it for 15, 20 years still didn't know what they wanted to do when they grow up. But they were managing directors and had whole practices underneath them. It's an interesting industry because it does involve such a diverse skill set that you can have a few different careers within that career and hop around, do internal projects and external projects with clients. You can be in IT or communications or financial management, all sorts of things. And I've worked in all of those things. And not so much IT, more like different roles that support IT. And it was a way of, because I still didn't know what I wanted to do, I got out of the military early, I wanted to keep my options open. I want to get pigeonholed into a particular industry or skill set, but I wanted to expand my resume. So that was a good combination of skills development that I could pretty much use in any other job I might have in the future. Mm-hmm. When I finally did decide what I want to do.
I echo that. I mean, what I've always appreciated about the consulting route for veterans is it seems like a really efficient way to get the lay of the land of these are different industries, whether it's pharmaceuticals, technology, whether it's finance. These are functional roles where you can play around with more operations or human resources or finance. And so you're able to, and just kind of the case-based work where, and I want to hear more about your experience, but I'm imagining it's usually 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, chunks of work where afterwards you can step back and say, I liked this element, but not this element. So I'm going to kind of readjust and explore this functional group now or this industry. And you're able to continuously learn about what's out there. And so that seems like an ideal way for someone straight from the military to get broad exposure very, very rapidly.
Absolutely. Well said. That's it.
And for like a military audience, I'm wondering what your thoughts are on the lay of the land. If you were to kind of point out who the players are, I know that you experienced BearingPoint and Booz Allen. Who are other people they might want to look at when they're thinking of dropping applications?
Okay. Well, there's lots of big names out there. Ernst & Young, Deloitte and Touche. I don't even know if it's Deloitte and Touche now. It might just be Deloitte. KPMG, McKinsey, Bain, Boston Consulting Group. And I don't know, because I've been out for a few years, I don't know the lay of the land right now, but a large part of it is a lot of these are companies within companies. It depends. Sometimes you're not applying to the company, but to the team. And that team affects your life more than the company does. And that might be, depending on your areas of interest or what your options are, where they're recruiting, where they're trying to expand, what kind of clients they're working with, that might affect your decision more than the actual company. And so I think any of those companies are potentially good. And Vault, just reviewing that to see what they're saying lately, it's best to get employees' perspectives. And there's a lot of companies out there that collect that data and put it back out on the web. So you can just Google employee satisfaction. So I think just employee satisfaction and mobility. So Some companies, you start in a role and you get stuck there, even though they advertise being internally mobile, where you can do what you just said, try all these different industries or teams. And some follow through on that more than others. Mm-hmm. So given if the benefit is having that flexibility we just talked about, I would say looking for the kind of firm that's going to let you do that, develop its people, which is another skill set that comes from the military, developing a team and creating your own development plan. What skills do I want, or what do I need for this deployment? I mean, it's more immediate often in the military, but same thing in consulting for yourself and others. How do we develop the skills so that we can go support this client? So finding companies that really do have that inner mobility and develop their people and spend money on training for their people.
And for someone who's on active duty who might not be familiar with what consulting is like, how would you describe kind of your day-to-day and week-to-week existence as a consultant? What sort of things you did, what your day was like, the people you interacted with, just painting that picture of what life was like?
I was largely in federal practice, and clients were the federal government. And our contracts were typically for the government work week. We couldn't work more than 40 hours that were billable to the client. And depending on what your role is on a team, if you're not doing business development, you're just doing client-facing work, my day was pretty well parallel a government employee. And in fact, I often looked like a government employee. I had the same badge, but I had to make sure there's just some for ethical and legal reasons, we have to clarify to people that there might be additional note on their contractor so that we aren't involved in certain discussions that we aren't supposed to be in, because that can give us a competitive advantage. But when it comes down to doing the work, I could often look just like a government employee. And day to day, so at times I was just government facing, client facing, and 7:30 to 5 every day. Get in, probably prepare for some sort of status update with the client. Like I said, I was in communications, business process re-engineering, compliance testing. So it can be a bit like, what's the plan of the day? And where are we? Letting them know where our team, our contractor team is on getting those tasks done. And then prioritizing, making sure that we're prioritizing correctly for that day, what needs to be done now and in the future over weeks and months. So status update meetings, sometimes requirements collection, so getting together with the clients, they want us to achieve something. It could be a bit like command by negation in the military, say, hey, this is how we want to approach your problem, or this is how we're going to test your requirements or requirements from another agency, because they all regulate each other. That could be part of it. So this is our approach. Do you have any concerns? Are we missing anything here? And ideally, no, because we spend a lot of time preparing for efficient meetings. That's probably why we get in earlier than the government folks, so that we get in that meeting and it goes quickly, that they see that we're aware of what's going on, we're not caught off guard, and then set about implementing whatever that plan is. Other times when doing business, so we want to bill every hour that we can. We want to be working for the client. That's what they're paying us for. So after those 40 hours during the week, in the evenings, could be doing business development, which is out of the company's pocket with the hopes of getting new business in the future. So could work on proposals, doing research about government or some other company, put out a request for proposal, and we'll look through that, think about what are the best ways to solve this, who else is working in this space, and what team members do we need to create a good proposal. We have internally, we have a list of everybody's resume and see who has expertise in these different areas and assemble that team to get them to work together on that proposal. But that's on top of the regular work week, so to speak. And I know different consulting firms, it could be more intense. My work schedule wasn't too bad, but I know some were working 80, 90 hours a week.
Yeah,
my life was not like that.
The attachment to the federal government is, I imagine, great in that regard, that you didn't have to have those insane hours that consulting is kind of known for. And what's cool about your experience, because my impression is that usually as you work your way up in a consulting firm, you're generally doing the client-facing work, a lot of the number crunching, a lot of the client work, and then as you become more senior, working your way towards partner, you transition more towards the business development of trying to sell new business and bring in new projects. And it sounds like that even from an earlier stage, you had exposure to the business development side, which is great to have that exposure to something that, at least for me, I associate more with the partner level.
Yeah, well, there's obviously different functions that you could provide, and there's always a need for somebody to do PowerPoints and editing and assembling, and so there's room for all different levels of knowledge and function within the company to participate in that. So I was not spearheading these efforts. I was definitely a functional member of the team, but because it takes a lot of work and always looking for people to participate, if you want to do business development, you can. There's any company I've been at, if you're willing to work those hours outside of your billable hours, they'll take you.
That's awesome. And traditionally, it seems like consulting's associated with a lot of travel. Were you usually local, or did you have to travel a lot?
I was mostly local. I did have a couple clients out of town, and they were. It was a little more challenging at that time because I was also taking classes in the evening about one of my other potential careers, and I would do that Monday night. So I'd work at home because everybody gets a laptop. I use that company machine doing client work at home Monday, go to class Monday night, and then get up Tuesday morning and fly to another state and work there 4 days for the week and then fly back Friday night.
Oh, man.
Yeah, and of course one of the perks of doing that is all the miles, which is real nice for the government to, or for, it ultimately does get handed to the client, the charge the client for the money spent, but then all the different travel perks that come from that make traveling easy later. And some companies do more of that than others.
And, one question I had for you is, having spent time at BearingPoint and time at Booz Allen Hamilton, how do you view those two firms as differing, either like culturally or the work that they do? How would you explain them as different from each other?
Well, BearingPoint ultimately was purchased. They broke off of KPMG. It was the management consulting part of KPMG, but they became their own company, did an IPO, and then they ultimately were bought up by Deloitte, I think. But because it was a younger company, Booz Allen has a great heritage in that the Edwin Booz coined the phrase management consulting, and they've been around for a long time, and that shows up in the culture a little bit, and that just the fact that I know that is due to their brand management, and they hired actually Disney to come in and create their cultural program too, because that's what Disney does. They create culture to create the onboarding process to make more of a Cobra culture different, because the consulting firms are often different teams within the larger company. It can be hard to create that sense of being part of a larger company. So they did a good job on that. And I just had a sense of that more solid company culture. In BearingPoint, I was in the public health and social services sector, and then at Booz Allen, I was in IT. So we were at the functional and client cross of IT and Department of the Navy. And so we often adopt some of our culture of our clients, some of our clients' culture. So having a Navy client or DoD client versus a Health and Human Services client affects our team's culture as well, which is interesting to see. And Booz Allen went public for the second time while I was there. They went public a while ago, bought the shares back because they decided it wasn't a good idea, and then went public again while I was there. And that can affect the culture of a company. BearingPoint went public as well. I don't know if it was right before or while I was there. Um, and that's a consideration if a company's public or private. The private companies can take more of their money and put it back into their employees, both in terms of training and education, but also in terms of team development. Like some people have more exciting, more fun ways of doing team development, and other people have to count pennies. So when going public, the money has to go to the shareholders. And companies like to say it's not going to affect the culture, but it does. It does affect how things operate when you have to be worried about perception and to meet SEC regulations. That's one of the reasons BearingPoint was ultimately purchased, trying to keep their books in order to meet SEC requirements, cost millions of dollars just to manage their finances.
Man, a whole nother set of overhead for them.
Yeah.
So after your time in management consulting, how did you go about choosing to pursue advanced education in psychology?
Well, after, like I said, I enjoyed the Navy and consulting, but I wasn't quite there yet. Something was, I don't know, just gave me the sense that I wasn't settled yet, hadn't found my career. And somebody mentioned to me at one point, I forget where I even heard it the first time, but the book, What Color is Your Parachute? And it's a structured approach to clarifying your skills, values, interests, priorities, kind of people you like to work with. And what it ends up with, and I know your listeners won't be able to see it, but the 7-petal flower, they call it. And it's got these different categories that I just mentioned. And I took about a month to go through in a structured way to look at these, the kind of knowledges I like to work with, skills, transferable skills I like to use. And then towards the end, you find 3 jobs or careers that overlap in those, in all that, all those different attributes, and find the one with the most education, and then interview somebody from that field because they have the most education. They're more likely to have the greater view of the other ones as well. So I interviewed a few psychologists because that's where my interests were overlapping, and determined that it was both based on their feedback to me when I said these are the things I like to do and how I like to work, and they're just meeting me and hearing how what drew them to psychology and what they do. I felt like I found the right career for me.
And so once you identified that that's what you wanted to go after, what was the process of applying to programs like? And in particular, any advice you'd have to veterans of thinking of going down this route?
Yeah, my part of the challenge was that I had no background in psychology. I had no undergrad credits. I had no experience, so it did require some serious planning. And so I started looking at programs. There's also a good book out there, Graduate Schools in Psychology, I think, which lists some like research versus practice, pros and cons of the program, and I think some prerequisites. And that's what I had to think about. How am I going to meet the prerequisites? And I like to create spreadsheets. So I looked at the schools, which schools had, I wasn't sure if I could do a master's or a doctorate because I had no background. And in the field of psychology, you can apply straight to doctoral programs without a master's and get a master's along the way. I wasn't sure if I'd be able to get in, so I also listed some masters on this list, some master's programs, and looked at could I possibly meet the requirements in time to apply? So what's my time frame? I was looking 1 to 2 years. And I created all the different courses that they required, common courses, and then did that school require it? And I found an overlap of 4 or 5 core courses that they all required. So I started, because I wasn't sure where I would apply, I started going to those classes at a community college to get those basic undergrad prerequisites. I knew I needed to take a GRE. So I started figuring my timeline on that. How much can I study? How much can I dedicate to it? And when do I want to take that in time to get those scores in for the applications, when that's going to come together? And then research. I wasn't sure how research-oriented versus clinically focused I wanted to be. So I needed to have some research under my belt to show at least an interest in that part of the field. And to be able to join a team or work on somebody else's research without being a currently enrolled student in psychology is very difficult because of privacy concerns and dependability. Like, why would somebody want to do research in this field if they're not in this field? I hadn't proven to anybody yet that that's something I wanted to do. So luckily, I did some networking. I went to the APA, American Psychological Association conference. They hold it every year. It's a national conference, just to get a sense of the field. Is this where I want to be? And I'd been going to different types of IT and business conferences, and a lot of people are vying for each other's time, a lot of very intense and frazzled energy. And then I go to the APA conference, and people are very happy to engage if you want to engage, very happy to sit back and not if you don't want to. Just the diversity and ease of engaging with the people at this conference was really a stark contrast to business, and I really enjoyed that. I was like, I can get with these people. These people are all right. So I continued to clarify that this is what I wanted to do in that way. And then back to the research piece, in networking at the conference, and calling around, trying to get anybody who would talk to me. I eventually found a woman who was doing research who required data entry, which is really the very basic level of research support, somebody to punch keys on a keyboard, taking hard copies and putting them into a spreadsheet. Very tedious work, but that's often the entry point for psychology trainees. So I was able to get in. So the course of my week was, and my Booz Allen ultimately let me go half-time because I decided this was the field I wanted to go into, but I wasn't ready to go to grad school full-time yet. And my team, luckily, our client work, we had the funding was right and the team transition was right, that I went back to half-time. And so I'd do research a couple days, data entry. I'd go do these prerequisite classes. I would study for the GRE during the week and do a practice exam every Saturday for about 2 months, and start collecting, figuring out where I'm going to apply. Based on the Yellow Ribbon program in particular, I had the GI Bill, but that only covers the highest in-state tuition. If the school costs more than that, you need the Yellow Ribbon program, where the school will put as much money towards your degree as the GI Bill will, as the VA will. In addition to that, so the VA will pay the state tuition, the highest in-state tuition for a state school, and then the difference is split with up to 100% with the school. And I looked for schools with a 100% Yellow Ribbon program. So that was one of my criteria, because it's pretty expensive. And I was about to give up my management consulting time and stop drilling with the Navy, so I was going to lose a lot of money. So my matrix, I ultimately found about 8 places and started applying.
Wow. I love so much about what you just said. I love the detail and just kind of the measured approach that you took in this. I think it's just also compelling to note how far in advance you had to plan this transition. It sounds like it was about, at least 2 years of thinking ahead of what you wanted to do, filling in the educational gaps and the research gap that you needed to fill to do that. And even the sacrifice you needed to make in terms of scaling back your work in order to make that transition. And it does seem like sometimes, whether it's straight from the military or afterwards, people underestimate the amount of effort and planning it takes to make a transition.
Yeah, it helps. I've advised a few people who are active duty, interested in this field. And it does take planning, but the more clear, so if I know generally which field I want to be in, there's some things that I'm not wasting my time. Psychology is interesting. So taking those classes, on the one hand, will hopefully lead to me going into graduate school, but I enjoyed them. It wasn't a waste of time. It wasn't a burden. I was driving around a lot of places, which I hate traffic and don't like driving. But the things I was doing were interesting to me. Even the tedious punching scores into a spreadsheet, I actually enjoyed that because I could start to see patterns and get a sense of how this person responded just based on these numbers. And it did take a lot of planning, but if I'm doing steps along the way that I enjoy, and the ultimate goal is something that I enjoy, uh, then it's not a matter of I'm doing this annoying and inconvenient stuff to get to what I want to do later. It's I enjoy this stuff right now, and it's going to help me get to where I want to go. I was lucky to be in that place, and taking the structured approach to finding out what I want to do. That helps make that not so overbearing or challenging.
I like that too because it's kind of in increments you're getting your feet wet, and whether it's through the classes or when you talked about going to the APA conference and getting to know the people and getting the sense of like this actually feels like a cool community, and it's kind of gauging the interest of other people. So I like too that in that approach you're constantly gaining more and more data to figure out, is this the right decision for me? And I think that's a great approach.
Thanks. Yeah, it's part of the benefits and challenges of being in the military is the need to be prepared, and that can become extreme sometimes. So holding the right amount of preparedness, because nothing's ever going to be perfectly set up. We can't ever be totally prepared, but that is one of the values that translates from the military is the planning and thinking ahead and figuring out prioritizing tasks at the right time to get done by the time they need to be done in that overall process.
And once you started the program, what's like your day-to-day life like? How especially in the early stages of the education process, how was your life?
It's front heavy on the academics. So there's probably two main parts of a doctoral degree in psychology. We start clinical work potentially early and research, and by the end this year I'm doing all clinical work. So I'm done with the academic, done with the required research. I get to focus on the clinical work. The first year, 5 classes a week, which took up 4 to 5 days a week. It was pretty heavy, and for my program, no research required in that first year, and no clinical work required. But one of the great things, especially about my program, one thing your listeners might consider is what are the research requirements? My program ultimately does have a research requirement, but there's not clear tracks that force us to work with a certain advisor or do particular research. We just got emails from the VA in the area, mostly VA or Stanford University, but other institutions in the area saying, we're doing research in this area. We need somebody to do measures, somebody to punch codes, somebody to do this clinical intervention. Who's interested? And if it fit in our schedule, and I found first year I went to meet somebody who was doing some biofeedback, breathing biofeedback for PTSD, and it landed in my mailbox, and they said, take your time, you don't need to get into research. Next year you'll start doing that. But you're free to if you want to. And I went to this meeting with the principal investigator, or actually a supervisor, who I was hoping to go in there and find out that it was kind of a boring study and didn't have skills that I was interested in. But it turns out it fit perfectly with what I wanted to do, the kind of stuff that interests me. So I ended up doing that, help supporting that research that first year. And then over the next couple of years, academic slowly backs off to 4 and then 3 classes, and clinical work gradually increases to practicum training. So on average, about 2 days a week of academics, 2 days of clinical work at a hospital or VA or community-based healthcare clinic, and then maybe a day of research. But in reality, any one of those days could be doing all 3.
That's great. I imagine that especially in those early stages, having the practical experience to go along with the academics helped, just kind of with sanity, but also like seeing how you would actually apply what you're learning.
Yeah, that was really fun, seeing the theory and research behind what we're doing, and then how that lands with clients. So I enjoy science and I geek out on psychology, and I did that before more since grad school, but before as well. And some of my clients like that stuff, and I'll bring in research and background information, and they'll find it really cool. Other people don't care; they have no interest. And that's not what therapy isn't, like sharing science with people, but we do use existing research to support what we do in therapy. So to see how this knowledge translates through me as who I am as a person, and then who a client is as a person, and how that all comes together in the room is really fascinating. And to do all academics without clinical work, a lot of the academics could be lost. Why do I need to learn this, or where would I use this? But just so happens that yesterday I learned about this in class, and this is exactly what's happening right now. I see the value that it brings, and this is a tool that we can use today in therapy. So that's really nice.
That's great. And I want to ask you about the veterans work that you do right now. But one last question I had was, a recurring theme that's come up in these interviews is how important it is to have self-knowledge. And so many people, when I talk to them, that's their number one advice is like, you need to know what you want to do. The more that you understand who you are, the better off you'll be able to make this transition from the military. And, you mentioned books like What Color is Your Parachute, but I want to just pick your brain if there's any other advice you have for people on active duty who want to get to know themselves more, to have that insight of what they may or may not like in the civilian world. Is there any other resources or advice you'd give to someone in kind of deepening that exploration?
Listen to your podcast.
Thank you.
And I guess friends and family who are outside the military, people who have made the transition effectively. And this is actually going to be one of my broader, it kind of applies now, I think, based on your question. So people should have friends and family to talk to, religious leaders, if that's part of your life, mentors and coworkers. And among those people, I think people should have a therapist. Maybe you don't need a therapist all the time. Maybe you're real busy and it's not going to have much value to your life. But I think having that sounding board of somebody who is actually trained in helping people do just what you're talking about, understanding themselves better. That's largely what therapy is. It's understanding oneself better. And so you can respond as your genuine self, not out of habit or limited knowledge. So us coming from the military, we knew the military. And that's just, it takes a lot of resources to dedicate to that. And just by the sheer need to attend to all that information, all that comes with that, there's not a lot of room to do these other types of self-exploration. You know what you can do under stressful circumstances, maybe how you work on a military team. But trying to take a step back and take that in context of larger life, most people aren't in the military, and most people don't have that experience. And there's, you shouldn't stop being a veteran or military person, but there might be certain values and priorities you have that you weren't, like I've discovered that I wasn't in a position to foster in the military. In some ways, that's why I transitioned out. The military wasn't saying to me, don't be that way. Don't not focus. How do I say that? You can do self-exploration. You can be. I was more of a, Myers-Briggs, and I was in a course, and everybody on there was thinking versus feeling. Everybody was a thinker, and I was a feeler. Of course, that's not psychometrically valid, and people can fall on both those in different circumstances, but I enjoy using my emotion and understanding myself. That's one of the skills I enjoy using. And there wasn't as much room for me, or I didn't find a way. I didn't know that was important to me when I was in the military. And I wasn't in a place to, had I known that, I could have implemented a little bit probably. And being a manager, a lot of good managers, they listen to their people and they're very empathic, and they use these skills in knowing themselves and how they're responding in a team. You can do that while you're in the military. You don't need to get out to do it. But little things like that, I felt like there were parts of me that hadn't grown up. not in like I was childish, but there were things that I hadn't come into for my full self in some ways because I was in the military, focusing on these other skills that are important and will last a lifetime. But there were other parts of myself that didn't get as much room to grow. And I'm sure that's different for everybody. And maybe they are fully expressing themselves in the military. That is who they are. And but I would guess just about everybody, there's at least one part or more that, not in a malicious way, but just they weren't in a place to foster that part of themselves because of the demands in the military. And if they find the right career or the right family or the right priorities in life, can grow in those ways that matter to them as well.
Oh man, I think that's such great advice, and I will chime in here as well because my introduction to therapy was when I was at Stanford, and a very close friend of mine passed away in a car accident. And Stanford, I imagine most educational institutions do this, but they provided 10, I think it was 10 free sessions with a therapist. And I had never done that before, and at the time was, I think for many of my friends, serving as, checking in on everyone and how they were doing with this loss of someone we loved so closely.
Using some of your leadership skills.
Yeah, or trying to. And, the experience for me in that introduction to therapy was, wow, here is someone where I don't have to worry about how I'm saying, what I'm saying affects her. I don't have to worry about being strong for this person. I can really start to unpack how this loss is affecting me. And it was extremely powerful at, in my view, accelerating mourning this loss in a way that without it, I think would have taken years. I wouldn't even have known the ways in which it was affecting me, or I would have powered through in a way that I would have had to pay for later. And then in entrepreneurship, in a variety of ways, working with leadership coaches, executive coaches, or even therapists. And I know there's many differences, but I would lump them all together in the terms of an individual who you are paying to work with you and help you work at a higher level. And I think for many people, and I would imagine for the military, these all have a stigma oftentimes of weakness. And I have come to view this as, if you talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs and you talk about that pinnacle of self-actualization, it's like, wow, like having the luxury to pay someone to work with me and coach me in a way to help achieve that, I think is so powerful. And I think that it's so funny for me because, if you want to work at your highest physical level, you work with a coach. You work with someone who can train you and help work with you and help you reach the peak of your craft. Or if you're an actor or in any field, it's just well established. If you want to work at your optimum potential, you need to have someone who can coach you and guide you. And I think that with therapy or leadership coaching or executive coaching, it's exactly the same. That if you want someone to really push you to your peak potential of understanding yourself, I think it's so vital. And in particular for the military, there are so many ways that we are benefited from our military training. But like with everything else, there's so many ways in which it affects the way we view the world. Not even positive or negative, even neutral. There's just ways that the military will affect the way you view things. And the starting point to being able to really command the full value of that experience is to understand that impact and to understand who we really are and understand how we're different than others and how our experiences have shaped that. So I don't want to use this as a soapbox, but I just really, what you said resonates in terms of the power that comes from working with someone to reach a deeper understanding of what makes each of us tick and how we're different.
Yeah, well said. I'm glad you broke that barrier of trying a therapist. Mm-hmm. You're absolutely right. And I didn't even see one until after I started graduate training to become one. Yep. Which is unfortunate because I've gained so much from it, and it also helps me help others too. I perform better, but also understand what it's like to be coached, to receive that guidance, or have somebody hold that space for me to explore whatever I'm dealing with. So I love the way you said that. It was really good.
Thank you. I mean, I can just point to so many things in my life too, especially with the startup, where there were times when I was just stuck viewing a problem a certain way. And it was literally in the course of a 50-minute conversation with a third party where I realized, like, wow, I'm approaching this. I didn't even realize this mental obstacle was there. But now that I see that, it's like I pictured someone removing a splinter from my brain. And it's like, wow, I can see the world differently now. And I can step around this problem that I had been just continuously grinding against for weeks, if not months. And just realizing, like, wow, in absence of that conversation and that counsel, I could have done that, for years before realizing, like, oh, wow, this is standing in the way of me operating at a higher level.
Yeah, and that's one of the ways that a military skill and attribute can become thwarted after military service, and that we learn to put your head down and keep going, and that there's things beyond our control. It doesn't matter. We have a mission. We have a plan. Just keep plowing ahead. And that you gave a great example. That can backfire. And learning to be more flexible, to be able to step back and say, okay, my goal is still the same, but I don't have to keep pounding my head against that wall because there's other ways to get to that goal.
Oh man, yeah. I mean, I even see that. I realized this in marriage a couple of years ago, where exactly what you said. It's like, wow. The advantage I have from the military is my ability to just blaze through work and stick on task and break through obstacles to get things done. And I realized that one way that hurts me is sometimes I would just have my in my mind my plan of, like, I'm going to get home and I'm going to do these 10 things, and then my wife Rebecca would approach me about something like, hey, can we talk about this? And in my mind, I'm like, I've got to go execute.
It's not part of the plan.
Yeah, it's not part of the plan. And then, like, realizing, like, oh, that's my natural tendency, but I don't have to do these 10 things right now. It's not a life or death situation. The ship is not leaving. The captain's not telling me to do this. I can choose to put that on hold. And sometimes it would be important enough to have to pursue it. But so often it's like, okay, I can step back now and deal with this instead. And it's kind of, I like what you said, because it's kind of like the two sides of the coin, that every strength is a potential weakness, and realizing where something might be serving us well and sometimes it might be working against us.
Absolutely. And that's a lot of what happens in therapy.
Yeah. Well, I know we're running short on time, but I would love to learn more about the work that you do with veterans right now. And I guess I'll kind of put the ball more in your cart, but the two things that were left on my mind was learning more about the work you do with veterans, but also recognizing that, we have a community of active duty personnel listening to this. Anything that you would want to say to them based on your work or just your experience, any advice you would have to those currently on active duty. So I realize there's a big potential net there, but just kind of throw it over to you for anything that comes to mind.
Yeah, well, I'll gladly talk about the work I've done and been doing, but just to clarify for your audience, I am not a licensed psychologist. I hope to be someday. And what I'm sharing with you is my perspective, and it might not be exactly how it happens for everybody in therapy, but my clients have had all sorts of challenges. Some more cognitive, attention and memory, mild traumatic brain injury related, mood, emotional, like depression and anxiety, and PTSD. And typically any one of these things has some of the others. All of us, every problem that somebody comes in with or challenge, we all have some of it. It's to what degree does it affect us, and how much does it interfere with our lives. So everybody's got a little something, and hopefully people who can really use the help are making a treatment. They don't always do it. But therapy can look different depending on what somebody's complaints are, what they got going on, or even their personality, or how I work. So like all those things come together. So sometimes it could be more what we call psychoeducational. It could be, hey, did you know these things? Did you know that different people need different amount of sleep at night, and the best thing you can do is wake up at the same time every day for a good, healthy sleep. And sometimes just information from science, typically, like psychoeducation is often bringing in the science and say, hey, did you know these things? And people, like, things start to click in their head and like, oh, I should do that differently, or I want to try that. Some are skills-based. We have different tools that come out of research and practice that help people achieve their goals. So it could be lots of different tasks. We're going to do these 5 tasks today. It could be very structured based on what you want to work on. And we know that these different these skills, you don't have so much of that right now. And here's different ways we can build those skills. For other people, it's a conversation. Maybe around particular topics, but it could be very much like you and I are talking now. It could be very casual. And it comes down to client preferences, how they work best, how they learn, the challenges they're dealing with. So it could look really different for a lot of different people. And I've done work in all those types of things under supervision. At this time, till I have a license, you do all this practice under a licensed supervisor, and also assess. So sometimes getting a clearer picture of what's going on for somebody. We have structured measures or interviews to help clarify for somebody. And a lot of people, they might find the assessments fun and challenging, sometimes uncomfortable. And a lot of people like to get that information at the end. Okay, so you spent all this time on me. We've answered all these questions. And sometimes people just like to see the graph or hear the information of what does this mean for me? And what can I do with that information? So that doing those in-depth assessments can help us find out what's getting in your way potentially of living the way you want to live and ways that we could improve that. Often with other professionals as well, so psychiatrists and physicians, nurses, occupational therapists, speech and language pathologists, all these people bring different skills to the table that help somebody meet their goals. And sometimes it's prioritizing, so sometimes it's the stuff we could work on might not be so important to you right now. And there's another provider who does another specialty that helps you meet your goals. So finding out when it's appropriate to say, we could do work right now if you have the time, but if we have to prioritize, you should go see this person. And help somebody clarify what they want. Here's all the things we offer. What do you think would be most useful to you? So all that together could look different for anybody. And different therapists work different ways, but generally that's what I do. Let's see. Oh, and you also said advice. So any questions? I know we're trying to wrap up here.
No, this is great. I think this is great.
Okay. And advice for active duty. Again, this is from my perspective, but there's science to support it, and I've dealt with a lot of clients. The importance of a strong social network to be protective against when stressors do happen in life, because stress happens. It's just part of life, and it's actually research shows that it's not the stress itself that causes problems. It's people's response to that stress is the problem. So we all have stress, and we respond to it with different ways. And not everybody is extroverted. Not everybody is going to talk somebody else's ear off about everything. But having a strong social network generally seems to be protective and helping and healing after some stressor. So friends and family, you might have to be selective if somebody's encouraging you directly or indirectly to do bad things or have bad habits, or they're just always getting under your skin, and that might be for another reason. But you can be selective about your social network, but you should have a strong social network when you're on active duty, and that's one of the great things about the military. It's often built in, and maintaining that when you get out. So people who are still in, but also friends and family outside the military, just having a strong social network wherever you are, and however you maintain that. So talk to a therapist, talk to somebody, find somebody who's good at that. Maybe you have a friend who's like really social or just has a really strong network and you like the way they go about that. Talk to them to clarify. And I'm not, I've had to work on my social skills over the years too. I tend not to rely on others, and that's part of what the military teaches us. Like, you're independent, take care of your stuff and your buddy's stuff, but don't be a burden to anybody else. And people fail to depend on others, and that's part of the way we develop relationships, is by being dependable, but also by depending on others. And that's part of having a strong social network. Sometimes saying, hey, I need help with this. Can I borrow your truck? or something more like I just lost a friend, or my significant other is being a pain in my rear end. So having some sort of social support. And and I forgot to mention 273 Talk. So if anybody feels like they might hurt themselves or somebody else, a 1-800-273-TALK, that's 273-8255. You could always dial that wherever you are, hit 1 if you're military or veteran, and they could connect you to support. And that resource is out there. You could also chat them. You could Google it online. If you just look up 273 Talk, you'll also get the chat number. You could text them if you can't talk where you are. You need to text. But given how much suicide we have in veterans out there, I think it's important that we spread that number as far as we can, and break the seal with a therapist. And the great thing, therapy doesn't have to be about fixing something that's broken. It could be about doing something better that you'd like to do better. And as you've experienced, and I have too, going into therapy, what is this? What's this about? What am I going to experience? So many veterans from Korean War through OIF, OEF say, I can't believe I didn't do this before. And the cool thing is, a lot of the vets I see, I'll see some Vietnam guys, and they'll be around the younger vets, and the Vietnam guys will be like, glad you're here sooner. You shouldn't have waited as long as we did. So if there's an inkling that you might need some additional support right now, just break the seal, go to a VA, go to a vet center, which is actually, if you're concerned with a big VA, vet center were created by veterans for veterans. And they have access to VA records, but the VA doesn't have access to their records. So that's actually for combat veterans only, the vet center itself. All veterans, VA, and spouses and significant others and caregivers can get support from the VA too. So if someone's having a tough time dealing with your stuff and they're helping you out, like a spouse or maybe even a parent, they might be able to get benefits from a VA as well.
I love what you're saying about, because I've seen that research as well. I mean, probably far less of it than you have, but the research around social connections and how that's a common denominator amongst, I would call it performance-enhancing drugs. If you look at top performers, they have very strong social networks that kind of help think through problems, help think through challenges, help weather storms, and just even things out overall. And I remember when I was graduating from Stanford Business School, when they were talking about stress in life, they talked about, look, if you're going to change geographic location, jobs, relationships, maybe one other factor, it's kind of like, if you can, if at all possible, change one of those at a time. So if you're going to change locations, keep the same relationships and same job if you can. And for people exiting the military, you're changing all of those all at once. And I agree with you that military personnel, it is an attribute, the ability to be self-reliant and the ability to take care of yourself. And most of us have extremely close ties with our units, and you are around them way more than any other job. And so parachuting out of the military, you lose those connections. And so really being deliberate about establishing those ties with family, religious groups, friends, other military veterans, and establishing that close network, it is a strategic advantage in everything, in job search and in continuity and in just grounding yourself. So I really, really appreciate what you said with that. And I like what you said too around, the approaching therapy not as I have a problem. I sometimes think of that as preventative maintenance, or I think about it in terms of another like performance enhancer, which is like, look, getting someone to really coach you and to help achieve that next level. So I like all of that, what you said, and am just really inspired by the work you're doing. It's for a worthwhile group, and I know that you're still in the process of learning and certifying and getting your degree on that, but it's awesome to see how you're giving back to the military community and the veteran community. It's definitely a worthwhile group to give back to.
Yeah, just like we were talking about earlier, offline, why you're doing this podcast and the value of it. It feels good to to reconnect with veterans, and that's part of that social network in different ways. But it's going to be a part of us for the rest of our lives, and we might have other important areas of life as well. But being a veteran, a lot of people hold that close to their hearts.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Tim. I appreciate your time on all this.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. You're doing great work.
Thank you.
Surface.
All right, that's all for today. A couple quick admin items. There is additional data, charts, graphs, key trends, and takeaways for the military community at beyondtheuniform.io. I encourage you to check that out. Also, to let me know if there's particular data or resources that would be helpful. I do have limited time, but am trying to devote as much as possible to helping out the veteran community. So feel free to contact me at beyondtheuniform.io. I wanted to give a quick plug for Service to School. It is a nonprofit organization, a free resource to any veteran who is thinking of applying to undergrad, grad school, med school, law school, business school. They will pair you with someone from your background who will coach you through interviewing, resumes, applications, which schools to apply to, and a host of knowledge, all for free. I encourage anyone on active duty who's thinking of getting out to contact servicetoschool.org. That's all for this week, and see you next week with more interviews.